Camera rolling. Dude, who are you talking to? Well, I'm talking to my audience, the people watching this movie.
It's not a movie.
Well, it will be. Somebody has to document our history.
An into-the-world action-adventure comedy film with an ensemble cast, multiple elaborate locations, and no budget sounds like a bit much for a first major attempt by a very young and inexperienced writer-director. But in the summer of 2010, that's the film that myself and a handful of local talent jumped headlong into making. And at the time, it felt like a pretty big deal. Most of my friends knew we were making a movie, and quite a few were excited to pitch in and help. Even some of their parents got involved. We had multiple casting days, a handful of preliminary script meetings. I was consistently posting update videos and behind the scenes material on social media to keep people interested. It was exciting. And through all the ups and downs and chaos of production and post-production, there was a lot to take in. And today, I want to talk about some of that.
Could you explain where everyone went for the camera?
You already know where everybody went.
I realize that, but the people watching this might not. What if hundreds of years from now someone finds this and they have no idea what Earth even is?
Alright, fine. Basically what happened is everybody left.
Those transportation things, they were like massive. And they like took all the people and like stuffed all their stuff and like stuffed them all up into Mars. And pretty epic experience.
It seems like just yesterday I was getting ready to go to college. And now, well, let's just say my priorities have shifted from writing to survival.
In order to slow the crime rate on the new worlds, they left all of the convicted criminals here on Earth. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, there were still innocent civilians left here too.
We tried to show people how important the Earth was, although if I had known how dangerous it would have been to stay, I probably wouldn't have stayed at all.
The first time I ever shared one of my film projects with someone outside of my family was actually by accident. I was 11 and had just finished making a short adventure film with some Legos and my parents' home video camera. I was in the process of recording it to a VHS tape when one of my younger brother's best friends, who was staying at our house at the time, walked in. Before I could stop the recording, he sat down and started watching it, and I was completely taken by surprise. It had never occurred to me that someone outside of my family might actually be invested in the stories I was making up. It wasn't long after this that I started enlisting the help of others to create films, and people seemed to really enjoy being a part of the process. There was so much enthusiasm and support back then, but as high school started, the innocence began to fade away and things naturally got a little more serious. The ever popular question, what would you like to be when you grow up, took on a whole new level of significance, and it didn't take long at all to realize that this whole interest in movies and video was far more than just a hobby. It was a passion for me. I didn't exactly know how to build a future for myself in film, but I knew I was willing to do whatever it took to get there. Each year brought with it more and more opportunities to hone my skills until finally, high school was behind me and the plan was to attend college in Tennessee after the summer break. That's when I decided it was the perfect time to make something big, or bigger than anything I had done before that anyways. This wasn't going to be just another short comedic video with some close friends. What we were striving for would ultimately be my first attempt at a feature film, which is something that I'd been dreaming about for years. After dedicating the entire month of May to finalizing the script that I had been developing on and off for quite some time, the story was finally nailed down. Early June was spent finding the cast and crew, and after juggling some last-minute changes, we were ready.
Set. Action.
Ah, good. Tate, give me the handcuffs.
Who's this?
I don't know. Found him in the front room.
Can I ask this new guy a couple of questions?
Fine. Don't get too loud.
So, who are you?
I don't want any trouble. It's just trying to escape the criminal lifestyle.
So, you're a criminal on the run then? Will they be upset when they find out you've gone?
Once you leave the gang, you become victim of their twisted game of hide and seek. I was on the run from them when I jumped through y'all's window.
Wait, you were followed here?
Well, yeah, but it's alright, I got away.
Great. All right, we gotta get out of here.
Whoa, oh, no, hey, we just got here, man. He said he got away.
They're coming back for him. And when they do, they're gonna have a lot more men and a lot more firepower. So we gotta go.
Whatever.
That was good. That was good.
Production for The Verosha Effect started late in the evening on June 18th in my parents' front yard. The only thing on the schedule for that night was filming a short car chase sequence and some brief pieces of dialogue surrounding the action. While this certainly wasn't my first time behind the camera, most of my past experience was pretty simple in comparison. I definitely had never worked with a crew of 10 people all looking to me for direction, and it showed. In the moment, I felt like I was doing an okay job, but later that night, when I sat down to review the raw footage, I heard the frustration in everyone's voices, even my own, and the looks of confusion that were occasionally shared between those on set. Instead of clearly laying out the plan, I would often ramble about details that weren't significant at that point in time, or have my crew trying to guess what I was looking for because I struggled verbalizing what I was seeing in my own head. While our first day of production certainly wasn't a long one, a lot of valuable time was wasted, and I don't know if it was just nerves or sheer inexperience, but the fact that everyone didn't bail on me that night says a lot more about the cast and crew than me because I had a lot to learn. The following weekend, we had our second production date on the calendar that included us shooting 2 scenes, each in a different location. The first half of the day was dedicated to a scene where a good chunk of the characters go out in search of food, end up getting held at gunpoint and robbed by 2 kids, before eventually negotiating their way out of the situation. The scene is one of the more comedic moments in the film, and I think because of that, the atmosphere on set was pretty light and cheerful. But while the first day of production, I wasted valuable time struggling to manifest a coherent thought, on this specific day, I flipped the script and pushed the whole shoot into hyperdrive because the second half of the day we'd be working on one of the more elaborate action scenes from the film. And while I am not in any way proud to admit this, I was a little more excited about the later scenes, so I spent the first half of the day barking action before everyone was ready to go, cutting essential coverage left and right, ignoring my better judgment when it came to wrapping a line of dialogue, and having little patience for outside creative input, no matter how valuable. Because of all this, the scene didn't really end up working exactly how I had originally planned it to, and we even had to go back and do some last-minute reshoots in an attempt to salvage the scene later on. Obviously, whenever you're making something like a movie, there's a detailed schedule and you can't have an in-depth conversation about every idea because you'd never get anything done. But if day 2 taught me anything, it's to always assume you'll need more time than you expect and to never, ever get ahead of yourself when it comes to what is directly in front of you. Because when it comes to putting something on the big screen, as they say, focus on what you're dealing with in the moment. I guarantee you'll be happier in the end.
Well, I think that went pretty well. Are we there yet? Serious, whoa! Are you 10? Sorry, no, I'm not 10. Hey, guys, look! Steven, did you put that gun in the glove compartment? Good.
Steven, put the seat down. Put the seat down.
Hey! Dude, that was seriously the most awesome thing I've seen in my entire life.
Well, thanks.
Alright, so this is probably going to sound like a complete non sequitur, but stick with me, I promise it'll all make sense in just a second. That truck right there is a 95 Ford F-150 that used to belong to my dad, but during production for The Verosha Effect, it had been sold to another family that wasn't, as of yet, tied to the film. Now, you might be wondering, if that was the case, why didn't we just use another vehicle? Well, simply put, I was trying to avoid vehicles that looked too modern, because I wanted things to be a little rough around the edges. It was supposed to be the end of the world after all. So I reached out to the family who owned it, explained why I wanted to include the truck in the film, and asked if they'd be willing to grant us access to it over the course of a couple weekends. They graciously said yes, which is still incredibly humbling to me to this day. I mean, this wasn't some unused vehicle just sitting in their driveway. That truck was a primary method of transportation for members of that family. And for a good chunk of the time, I was basically asking their family to give up access to it for my movie. I didn't really have a way to properly reimburse them for their sacrifice outside of thanking them profusely and offering to put their names in the end credits, which leads me to one of the biggest takeaways I got from this whole experience. That long list of names at the end of every single movie that no one ever watches or pays attention to, those individuals' contributions are oftentimes monumental to the process, but their faces remain out of sight of the camera and their names hardly ever get the spotlight they deserve. And when it comes to the Verosha effect, it was no different. Case in point, 90% of the props and equipment we used during production for the film were owned by other people, and a few of those items even got damaged during shooting. Multiple families granted us permission to take over their homes for hours at a time, which meant they had to move to another side of the house or somewhere else entirely. And speaking of taking over a place, my family's house was turned completely upside down for multiple weekends in a row. This scene was shot in my parents' room, and because I wanted it to look as empty as possible, everything was rapidly tucked out of frame. This scene we shot in my brother's room. Everything was pushed to one side. This is another scene that lasts barely more than 30 seconds, and all the furniture is shoved out of sight, out of mind. I basically transformed the entirety of the place my family called home into a studio for days at a time. And while my parents were extremely supportive through this whole process, my mom is one of those people who generally likes the house to be together, so there was definitely some personal sacrifice going on right in front of me that I did a poor job of recognizing or addressing at the time. Sorry, Mom. What I'm trying to get at here is watching everyone selflessly contribute their time, energy, possessions, and even homes to this project helped me to discover the irreplaceable value of a strong community and how if you have the right people on your side, anything is possible. And considering the hectic schedule that reigned over June and July, there was also a lot of patience and flexibility that was displayed to me personally, because I know there was a handful of times, especially over the phone when it came to scheduling production days, things would sometimes get a little intense. Some days it was the entire crew, other days it was half, and occasionally one or two people might come over for a couple hours at a time for individual shots or close-ups. There was always something to keep us busy. But finally, after weeks of hard work, call time for our last day was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp on July 24th, and it was going to be by far our most intense day of production yet. We had 4 different locations we'd be shooting at, more extras than any other scene in the film, and to top it all off, one of our main characters had to change his hair color from red to green halfway through the day. Whenever I reflect back on the production process in its entirety, while there were certainly a plethora of missteps and the occasional bout of utter chaos, our last day of production was not one of them, and I'm really proud of that fact. There were so many places we had to get to and a lot of people needing direction, and everything came together about as perfectly as it could have. There was a handful of dialogue and one entire scene we had to cut from the ending just so we wouldn't fall too far off schedule, but amazingly, the movie was all there. We finally wrapped on the film at 1 a.m. the following morning, and I still remember that day being one of the busiest, most exhausting, and simultaneously exhilarating days of my entire life. But, as all of you are no doubt aware, wrapping on production is merely the end of one chapter in the process. The next chapter, post-production.
Tate, what are we looking at?
3 guys, dead ahead. I don't know if there's any more in the building or behind it.
Can we get around them?
No. There's a long string of gang outposts for miles in either direction. They're spread out, so if we just punch through, we should be able to take them.
Go for the door, and take Ray with you.
Before college, my primary editing software was Final Cut 7, and stating that I spent days glued to that program would be an understatement. The Verosha effect incorporated a lot of firsts for me in the edit, syncing and mixing external audio, including some original Foley work, incorporating graphic design elements, color correction, and of course, muzzle flash. Lots and lots of muzzle flash. I'm sure at this point, a good chunk of people have more than a few questions about the title of this video. Mainly, was the Verosha effect ever actually a feature film? Because if you take a quick look at IMDb, that's a solid no. According to the American Film Institute, in order for a movie to be considered a feature, it has to cross the 40-minute mark. And that was the original goal for the Verosha effect. It was gonna just barely squeak in somewhere between 42 to 45 minutes. Now, I realize by most industry standards that's still not really considered a feature-length movie, but that was our goal. That way, at the end of the day, we could all say we technically made a feature. Well, turns out I had drastically overestimated the length of each action scene, and after cutting a chunk of the dialogue in that one entire scene from the end of the movie, we definitely did not have a feature. What we did have was a very dense 34-minute short film, and just in case y'all are curious, for most film festivals, that runtime is pretty much a death sentence. Luckily, I didn't really have any plans to enter the Verosha effect into the festival circuit, mostly because I had no idea how to do so the runtime didn't really matter, but the dream I had of making my first feature that summer was a failure. This was pretty disheartening at the time because I felt like I missed the mark that I set for myself, and if I'm being honest, there was a handful of evenings that I really struggled building up the motivation to even work on the project because I felt like it wasn't going to be everything I wanted it to be. And as a perfectionist, this can be a tough pill to swallow on occasion. After pulling myself away from the project for 1 or 2 days, I realized something. I had to finish this film. It didn't matter how long it was going to be or if it was even everything I hoped that it would be. What mattered was the fact that we tried in the first place. And if that's not worth sharing, I don't know what is.
Okay. They're not making this easier.
For the record, I realize that probably all sounded incredibly cheesy, but the truth is, anytime you fall on your face or miss the mark, as they say, the ensuing pep talk about getting up and continuing on is just the inevitable part of the process. Anyways, after checking with my family's church to see if they would allow us to premiere the film there, we had 2 separate showings scheduled for the very beginning of August, 2 weeks before I was scheduled to leave the state. Naturally, I was making adjustments to the master cut until literally the day before the premiere. And when that day finally arrived, I was a nervous wreck. Sharing your work before a live audience is a scary thing. The feedback is immediate. If something isn't working, like a joke or an emotional moment, the silence is deafening. When the film started, I actually couldn't bring myself to watch it. I hid in a closet at the back of the room, just listening. Most of that evening was a blur for me, probably because I was holding my breath for what felt like the entire runtime. But there is one specific moment that managed to cut through the nerves and ingrain itself in my brain. During the car chase scene, yes, the one we shot on the very first day of production, one of the characters turns around and shoots a hole through the windshield of the car that's chasing them. This was naturally an effect I added in post, but the buildup around the moment was pretty intense, and when it finally happened, one of the adults in the audience let out a verbal "wow," and that has continued to echo in my mind to this very day. I love when the people I share my work with feel something, and I think that's what all of this has always been about. Since the very beginning of this journey that I've been on since I was a little kid, my love for what I do has only grown, and saying that I can hardly wait to see what the next chapter of this adventure has in store is an understatement if there ever was one.
What?
More than we thought. Looks like about 8 of them.
Come on, we'll take them.
Yeah.
Great idea, Eastwood. You want to go first?
Well, I was actually thinking Tate would volunteer because he's so good with the guns. Not happening.
I got an idea. Kemp, as soon as you hear the engine rev, take off.
Hey, could I get your opinion on everyone leaving Earth?
Sure.
I'm looking for something I might be able to use in my documentary about everyone who stayed behind.
When we used to think of the end of the world, we thought of disease, famine, natural disaster, nuclear holocaust, or an asteroid or something. No one ever thought we would just leave. Humans have become an expert at making problems just disappear, and we're still caught up in the idea of creating a utopia. But the question still remains, does evil lie here on the earth, or does it lie inside of us?